Tom, why shouldn't Black literature, Chicano literature, specific courses designed to introduce kids to other points of view be taught?
Well, the standards that we promulgate require that all social studies classes teach different cultures. We want all kids to be exposed to a lot of different cultures. But what I'm opposed is dividing kids up. So they have Raza studies for the Chicano kids. Raza means the race in Spanish. African American studies for the African American kids. Asian studies for the Asian kids.
But what's wrong with that? If an African American kid wants a class that has a focus on African American studies, what's wrong with that?
What's wrong with it is that it divides students up by race, and I believe that one of the principal ideas of the American public school system is we bring kids together and we teach them to treat each other as individuals. What matters about a person is what does he know, what can he do, what's his character or hers, not what race was he born into. And one of our important functions is to teach kids from different backgrounds to treat each other as individuals and not to infuse them with ethnic chauvinism about a particular race and teach them narrowly just about the background and culture of the race they happen to have been born into, but to teach them about all different cultures and different races and different traditions and not divide them up by race. I think that's really backwards.
Micheal, you've taught a course like this at Georgetown. Mr. Horne is basically saying, look, these classes are teaching these kids that they've been oppressed and that it creates anger and hatred, he said.
Well, it's ironic to me, first of all, Mr. Horne doesn't see the contradiction in terms because he has targeted this law toward Chicano studies. So he's targeted a specific racial subgroup, an ethnic group within the large panoply of American identities for this program. Number two, what's interesting is that ethnic studies are rife in American history, but the ethnicities happen to be Polish, Irish, Italian. They happen to be white European, Western, and Eastern European identities that are the basis of ethnic identity and what constitutes American history. If there was an integration of Chicano studies, of African American studies, of Latino studies, of gay and lesbian studies into the broader curriculum, there would be no need to have these subgroupings and the subcultural attention paid to these particular formations. Thirdly, I teach classes all the time at Georgetown and before that at Penn and at DePaul University, and most of my students happen to be people who are not students of color. So they happen to be African American, but they also happen to be Latina, Asian Americans, and white Americans. I think that white Americans benefit from Chicano studies. I think that white Americans benefit from Latina studies. I think that white Americans benefit from African American studies. And finally, if we're talking about American history and shying away from the history of oppression, we're not talking about American history. I live in Washington, D.C. Right next door, the governor of Virginia failed to mention that slavery was a critical part of the Civil War. This is why we need these area studies to remind us the true history of America. And I think that Mr. Horne would agree that when we tell the truth about American history, the blood, the glory, the hardships, and all of that needs to be told along with the great celebration of American democracy.
Tom, you said that Chicano studies is teaching kids they've been oppressed and it makes them angry and unruly. Hasn't there been a history of oppression, though, of ethnic groups in this country, and shouldn't kids learn that?
Well, let me say that I didn't say that. I was quoting a former teacher who said that. We have testimony from a number of teachers and former teachers about the radical separatist agenda that the Raza Studies program has.
You did say that actually in your arguments that you published as an open letter to the people of Tucson.
Yes, I was quoting a teacher, so it wasn't from. I wasn't just asserting it. We had quotations from a witness that that was.
But you believe that.
Occurring.
Why do you believe that? I mean, shouldn't if there has been a history of oppression, which most people would say there has, why shouldn't that be taught?
The textbook they use called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire, who's a well-known Brazilian communist. I've read the book. The sources are Marx, Engels, Lenin, Che Guevara, the philosophers who influenced them. And these kids' parents and grandparents came to this country, most of them legally, because this is the land of opportunity. And they trust their children to our schools. And we should be teaching these kids that this is the land of opportunity, and if they work hard, they can achieve their dreams, and not teach them that they're oppressed. In fact, one of the girls they sent up some of the kids.
So
from
is there no racism today? I mean, is that something that should not be discussed?
That's not the predominant atmosphere of America. America is a land of opportunity, and we should be teaching the kids that this is a land of opportunity and not teach them the downer, that they're oppressed and they can't get anywhere. They should be angry against their government. They should be angry against the country. That's what the teachers are saying. Their observation is that has been going on in this Raza Studies program. In fact, I brought in a picture that you might want to show that shows the revolutionary garb that they wore when they protested against by law with masks, sunglasses, berets, brown shirts. this is a revolutionary program, which is an absolute abuse of taxpayer money to do that in the public schools. And there was a girl, they sent up a bunch of students to testify at the legislature, and a girl was testifying. A state senator said, couldn't you learn these things in other courses? And she said, no, before I took this course, I didn't realize I was oppressed. Now that I took the course, I realize that I'm oppressed.
Michael, what about that?
Well, this is ludicrous. Paulo Freire, the correct pronunciation of the Brazilian philosopher, talked about pedagogy of the oppressed, learning of people who have been oppressed. You could talk about Michel Foucault, who's a Frenchman. You could talk about Jacques Derrida. There are many people who talk about oppression and the release from oppression and how we gain relief from it. In fact, Anderson, the history of America is to seek relief from the oppression of the British so we could establish this country. So we're teaching relief from oppression when we talk about the relief from the British. But more specifically, this is ludicrous to assume that the entire history and culture of a people can be reduced to responses to white supremacy, social injustice, and inequality. The reality is we have fought those battles, but we have made America better. When Martin Luther King Jr. marched, that should be taught not simply to African American people, but to Americans, because he fought against the principles and practices of prejudice so that the ideals of democracy could become real. Cesar Chavez, when he fought for the workers' rights there in California, that story needs to be told so that Americans can understand that there were histories of people who
but Michael,
let's
teach American history to all of the kids, and we can show both sides of issues when we teach history to all the kids, but don't divide them by race and teach the black kids black history, the Chicano kids Chicano history, the Asian kids Asian history. They should all be exposed to all the history.
Absolutely.
And it's a race-obsessed philosophy that should be kept out of our schools, that kids should be put in courses where they only learn about the history of the race they happen to have been born into. That is the wrong philosophy for the American public schools.
If you have been demoralized and degraded and your history has not been taught, why should we have to have a special class for Chicano studies? Why doesn't the larger curriculum deal with the profound and sophisticated contributions of Chicano people to American society? Once that happens,
we have that in our standards. Once
that happens, then when we integrate the full arc of the contributions of demoralized and degraded peoples into the curriculum, then we won't need that curriculum until that time.
I got to jump in here. Tom, let me ask you, a lot of your critics say, look, this is about politics. You want to run for Attorney General. You're running for Attorney General. Your term is up as Superintendent. Is that true? You're running for Attorney General?
Yes, I am running for Attorney General. I've served 8 years as Superintendent of Schools, and that's all that's allowed.
So to your critics who say this is about politics, you're basically trying to appeal to potential voters out there.
I've been fighting for this law for 4 years, and this is among my most deeply held beliefs. I mentioned to you being on the March on Washington where Martin Luther King gave his speech. I believe very deeply that people are individuals. They are not exemplars of the race they were born into. And this race-obsessed philosophy that your other guest is expounding, and it's going on in Tucson, is wrong for the American public schools.
It's not race-obsessed. First of all, you repeated that same statement earlier, so it's a great line. But the reality is, Martin Luther King Jr. said, the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundation of this nation until the Negro, and we can add others, are granted his full citizenship rights. He talked about the bitter legacy of white supremacy before he began to talk about that dream. And then he said that in America, it's an ideal toward which we should strive. But in the meantime, we should adjust to the reality that we have some negative realities that we should adjust to and that we should address. And I think that Martin Luther King Jr. cannot be used to justify xenophobic and racist passions that are dressed up as desires to reform the curriculum.
Well, I would say the xenophobia and the racism is on your side.
Not at all. I don't want to keep anybody out. I don't want to keep anybody out. I want to include all people. I don't want Arizona has been deeply, profoundly racist and xenophobic.
Kids by race. You want to divide kids by race.
No, I want white kids to learn about Chicano people. I want white kids to learn about African American people.
Inspired us all by saying that we should be judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin.
The night before he died, Martin Luther King Jr. said, America, all I ask you is to be true to what you said on paper.
One at a time, because both at a time, no one's going to listen. Michael, finish up.
American people and others, now you must raise them up. Martin Luther King Jr. cannot be taken out of context, and you can't use one speech as if you froze him in 1963 without seeing what he said in 1968, where he was bitterly opposed to the practices of most of what America was doing in the name of freedom and democracy. That's the tradition, I think, that the people who support Chicano studies in Arizona are carrying forward.
Tom, I want you to be able to show on, then we got to go.
Okay, it is not out of context to say that he's inspired us all with the idea that we are to be judged as individuals. What can we do? What is our character? Not what race do we happen to have been born into. Don't divide kids by race. Don't propagandize kids that they're oppressed and that they have no future and they should be angry at this country.
But anyone
teach them that this is the land of opportunity. Teach them that this is the land of opportunity where if they work hard, they can achieve their dreams. and teach them American history.
Tom, anyone, just for accuracy's sake, anyone can take these classes.
Anyone can take the classes,
Okay.
but they're designed primarily for the race, either the
Horne,
African American, the
gotta leave it.
Chicano,
Tom Horne,
the
Michael,
Asian,
Eric
or
Dyson.
the Indian.
Guys, I appreciate your time. Good discussion.